Thanks very much, Steve and the panel. I really appreciate your time, and thanks in particular, Kent, for braving the onslaught of questions there on behalf of YESIB. I think we could all talk forever about the regulatory process, and I'm glad to see so much engagement on that file. The Chamber of Mines has been having a lot of discussions about how we continue to have more in-depth conversations on the regulatory front, and we're contemplating perhaps a symposium or something really more focused on exploring these issues in more detail. So stay tuned, and hopefully we can continue these conversations as we move forward. Our next presentation is by a couple of folks from CERNAC and CANOR, which are federal departments, and they're going to speak to us about the Northern Regulatory Initiative, which is a federal government-led initiative to look at improving regulatory processes in the North. So I'm really pleased to have up Kim Pauley from CERNAC, the Natural Resources and Environment Department, and Carrie Sebald from the Northern Projects Management Office of CANOR.
Good afternoon, everybody. I was introduced, but just to repeat, I'm Kim Pauley with CERNAC, Northern Affairs Organization in Gatineau, and I'm here with my colleague Carrie from the Northern Projects Management Office, CANOR, here in Whitehorse. We are honored to have been invited here today to share an overview of the Northern Regulatory Initiative, or NRI for short. We'd like to thank the Kwanlin First Nation and Tanquachin Council for welcoming us to your traditional territories this week. It's my first time back in Whitehorse since the pandemic, and it's great to be back, and it's been a wonderful few days with the forum, and the panels today have been really super interesting. As noted by Nicole in her keynote presentation on Sunday, on the NRCan-led critical minerals strategy, CERNAC is leading the Northern Regulatory Initiative with CANOR's support. I'll be sharing an overview of the genesis of the pan-territorial NRI and its current status across the North, recognizing that it's still very early days in implementing the initiative. Key is consideration that the integrated regulatory regimes in the North are largely negotiated ones, developed in the context of settling comprehensive land claim agreements to provide certainty and clarity of rights. Despite challenges, some of which the NRI hopes to address, they can be regarded as a model of reconciliation through the integration of Indigenous partnerships and decision-making. Carrie will provide you with some Yukon-specific updates on the initiative, including highlighting engagements we've had so far here in Yukon and how they are shaping how we move forward with the initiative in the territory. Being from government, I don't have a forward-looking statement that's impossible to read at the front end of my presentation, but I will say this. The success of the NRI will be based very much on knowing and addressing the priority regulatory interests of both Indigenous and public governments, as well as industry, those engaged in and impacted by exploration and mining and enabling infrastructure in the three territories. To that end, we are happy to engage with you at any point, either after the presentation today or afterwards. We'll leave our contact information. Don't know which way it goes. There we go. So Budget 2022 proposed $3.8 billion over 8 years to implement the critical minerals strategy, which was designed to, among other things, accelerate responsible project development in a way that advances reconciliation with Indigenous peoples and fosters economic growth, climate action, strong environmental management, diverse and inclusive workforces and communities, and global security and partnerships. As part of the strategy, CERNAC was allocated $40 million over 7 years to support northern regulatory processes, given their unique nature within the Canadian regulatory landscape. Clear, trusted, and functional regulatory systems in each of the 3 territories are essential to advancing critical minerals projects in a way that responds to both the broad objectives of the critical minerals strategy and the specific priorities of Northern partners. And while driven by a desire to advance critical mineral projects, if the objectives of the NRI are met, it's not just critical minerals projects that will benefit, it's all mineral projects across the north. As we like to say, a high tide floats all boats. Through various fora over many years, we've heard our Northern partners repeatedly identify a need for Indigenous capacity funding to engage meaningfully in natural resources management processes, clear Crown consultation processes, more holistic approaches to resource management, and collaborative dialogues and relationships. The NRI seeks to address some of these needs, some of these sticking points, as Grand Chief Peter Johnston said earlier this afternoon. Through 4 priority areas or buckets shown here, the NRI will support meaningful participation of otherwise unfunded Indigenous governments and organizations in land use planning processes and early and post-decision phases of impact assessments, recognizing that participant funding is already available across the north for board-led impact assessments of major projects. Second bucket is the coordination and clarification of Crown consultation processes. And the third bucket is regional studies and studies that will enable better consideration of cumulative effects in regions of high critical mineral potential and or enabling infrastructure potential. And lastly, but maybe most importantly, opportunities to bring parties together to share perspectives, identify challenges, and collaboratively explore solutions to regulatory concerns. As Andrew said in the panel just now, communication is key, and so that's really a focus of the Northern Regulatory Initiative. The NRI is in its early stages of implementation in each of the 3 territories and depends on input from governments, rights holders, and stakeholders to define the priorities they would like to see advanced in each of these 4 buckets. Resulting actions will ensure projects are not stalled or delayed due to Indigenous or public concern, lack of participation or information, or even court challenges. So where are we now in terms of implementing the initiative? We've begun looking at ways to support Indigenous participation in pre-submission and post-decision phases of impact assessments and land use planning processes where federal governments have a role to play. For example, we might support development of project-specific consultation protocols or agreements with Indigenous governments, or provide capacity for Indigenous participation in advisory groups or mitigation monitoring programs post an impact assessment decision. We are also examining what federal Crown consultation looks like across the north and across the spectrum of regulatory decision making. Who's doing it? What does it look like? Where are the gaps and opportunities? And how best can we coordinate this work moving forward? At the request of the Clecho government, the Northern Regulatory Initiative is supporting work by key Indigenous and public governments to develop a terms of reference and a committee structure to guide a regional study in the Slave Geological Province. We're starting with the Northwest Territories, but since that geologic province transcends both NWT and Nunavut, we're designing it in a way that the study could be expanded to Nunavut in the future. This study, once completed, will help inform future project proposals, recommendations, and decision-making in a region faced with a variety of development and environmental pressures, including diamond mines, which are closing in the near future, new exploration projects, including a lithium staking rush, proposed enabling transportation corridor and energy infrastructure projects, and declining populations of culturally important caribou. As Neil mentioned yesterday during his keynote, we have to keep working together to support smooth regulatory processes while ensuring that they, as many presenters this week have noted, uphold the high ESGI standards that make Canada, and especially Canada's north, where modern treaties form the basis of resource management systems, different. We are interested in finding ways to bring resource management practitioners, including industry, together in each of the territories to listen and to learn from one another and collaboratively build solutions to common issues through inclusive and productive dialogue. There are lots of opportunities for dialogues across the north, as well as many existing initiatives that can be leveraged, such as the Mackenzie Valley Operational Dialogue in the Northwest Territories. We are working together with our colleagues at Natural Resources Canada to coordinate this work where possible. For example, working with the teams that are leading discussions on the resource and energy tables. I'll now turn it over to Carrie to discuss some of the specific priorities we've heard through our engagements in the Yukon and potential next steps. No, I'm the wrong way, yeah.
Hello, everyone. So as Kim was saying, we've had some initial engagement, at least on the NRI in Yukon. And I think just first to start off, as everybody I think here probably knows, resource management in Yukon is unique. The previous panel talked a lot about that, coming from the UFA. YESA implements those commitments coming from the UFA, from Yukon First Nations final agreements, and designed to do a lot of things like protect, promote environmental and socioeconomic well-being, uphold rights and title of First Nations, provide opportunities for public participation, of course, and advance sustainable development. So we have met bilaterally, CERNAC and CanNor, we've met bilaterally with representatives from the Indigenous Minerals Caucus, Yukon Government, YESIB, and the Yukon Chamber of Mines this summer. And I think representatives have continued to identify the need for resources to support more meaningful participation and coordination within the existing YESA process and existing elements of the regulatory process in Yukon to ensure that they function as intended by final agreements and of course legislation, and the NRI is intended to begin addressing and responding to some of these needs. The discussions we've had so far, and again this is just so far, it's what we've heard to date, have been really to discuss priorities that could be supported by the Northern Regulatory Initiative, and each of the representatives really expressed a great deal of interest in all of the buckets that Kim had on that previous slide. And we'll just sort of summarize some of those things that we heard on each of those buckets over the next couple of slides. So first, thinking of the Indigenous participation in environmental and socioeconomic assessments in Yukon, really front end and of course long term, so two separate front end and long term capacity funding was really described as important to support First Nations engagement and participation in projects in a way that complements other initiatives like the Northern Participant Funding Program, which, as Kim mentioned, is really focused on supporting participation within a project assessment itself. Crown consultation, clarity and coordination, as Kim also mentioned, and as we heard through our engagements to date, there is a growing need for coordination among assessors, among decision bodies, regulators, and with respect to Crown consultation and in accordance with Yukon First Nation final agreements. So process maps were one idea that were raised as something that could be helpful to really illustrate opportunities for coordination and explain sort of how that process could work. There we go. In terms of cumulative effects and baseline studies, I think cumulative effects is definitely a key topic we've heard a lot about in Yukon over the last few years. And through our engagements, again, heard that there is a need for both environmental and socioeconomic baseline data and cumulative effects data to support proponents, to support assessors, decision bodies, and communities in assessing and looking at projects. Representatives that we've met with emphasize that data should be collected in a meaningful way that can be integrated into the existing systems and also considered early on in project assessments. And the regulatory dialogues. All of the individuals and representatives we met with expressed an interest in coming together to build relationships and trust, to learn more about how the regulatory processes work and ensure that long-term and benefits and sustainable infrastructure flow from developments and advance legislative and operational priorities. I think one thing that overall clearly came out of the engagements that we had over the summer was a desire for collaboration and for action. It's, no one party has all of the answers or all of the pieces, and we all need to work together collaboratively to bring all of those ideas together and advance measurable actions and concrete. Advance measurable and concrete actions, really. So what are we doing next? So CERNAC and Canor are exploring again how to respond to sort of what we've heard so far and to respond to those needs and priorities raised by governments, by rights holders, by stakeholders in Yukon that advance the objectives of the NRI. So as Kim mentioned, $40 million over 3 territories in 7 years. It's not a lot of money, but it is certainly a good place to start and to get collaborative momentum going in a good direction. So in terms of what we are looking at currently, we're continuing to look at ways to support Yukon First Nation participation in environmental and socioeconomic impact assessments, and are currently working internally to better understand and communicate Crown consultation requirements, roles, and process and procedures across the regulatory processes in Yukon, the Northwest Territories, and Nunavut. We also do want to look at baseline and cumulative effects data, what data is out there now, what is accessible and where more research is needed to just get a better understanding of sort of the lay of the land. And this also includes recommendations coming from the most recent YESA forum, which also was focused on cumulative effects. And it's also a great example of a table that brings multiple parties together to collaborate on key issues and priorities of interest. And lastly, we're continuing to look forward to working with all of you through forums like this and others to discuss priorities, share updates, and to understand how the NRI and other northern elements of the critical mineral strategy can support clear, trusted, and functional regulatory systems and processes. So again, this presentation is just a snapshot of what we've heard so far, and we want to continue to build upon that, working towards a collaborative framework for the NRI and the critical mineral strategy in Yukon and, of course, across the north. And I think that's all that we have. It's fairly short. But really, thank you for your attention and attendance, of course. And if you want to learn more about the Northern Regulatory Initiative, our contact is here, so please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Recommendations, ideas, we're definitely all ears to hear what's out there, so please don't hesitate to reach out.
All right, thank you very much, both Kim and Carrie. Really appreciate the update on what is an important initiative that has a lot of potential to help improve some of these processes in the north. All right, we're moving into our last presentation of the day. It is on ESG metrics reporting, and it will be presented by Amiel Blachman, Manager of ESG for Avalon Advanced Materials. And I hope I got that pronunciation right.